I am the oldest of six kids. My parents were really young when they had me. My dad was 19, almost 20, and my mom had just turned 18. So
Wow.
they got married young, still married. So they're at 55 or 60 years, something like that. They've been married a long time. And oldest of six, we had four boys pretty close together. It's A, B, C, D, E, F. Aaron, Ben, Christian, Dustin, Eden, and Flynn. When I
That's
was
awesome.
15, my little sister was born. And then when I was 17, my little brother was born. So there was, the age difference was pretty substantial once you got past the first four.
That's awesome. Where?
Where do we live?
No, where were you born? Like, is it in Northern California?
Yeah, I was born in a little town called Quincy in Northern California, and we really moved from California. We went up to Idaho for about 5 years, from when I was five till I was 10 or so, and then we moved to Reno, and we lived in Reno till I was 16, and then back down to California for another 4 or 5 years, and then back up to Reno, which is where I met my wife, and then we moved down to where we live now, Modesto area, in '97. We've been there for
Wow.
20, what is that, 28 years now.
So all that
Crazy.
movement, was that like searching for opportunity or work? What was that movement
My
for?
yeah, the movement when I was younger was we moved a lot. My parents never owned a house. They owned two houses in the whole time that I was growing up, and both of those, the first one we moved when I was five, so they lived in that house for 2 years before they sold. And then when we bought our house in Willows, or when they bought their house in Willows, I was probably, I don't know, 16, and then I moved out at 18. So most of the time we were renting, and we were just moving from place to place to place.
Wow. And what was the movement for about? Like, aside from finding a new place,
Mostly
jobs.
job. And
What
then,
was your dad doing?
my dad originally was a baker, and then he started doing sales. When from Idaho down to Nevada, my grandfather owned a business and asked my dad to come work for him and kind of manage and do sales. And then we moved down to Willows because he got headhunted by another company, and then that's where they were until I moved out of the house.
What was he selling?
It started out with my grandfather was, yeah, with my grandfather was like non-food items. When you go to an AM/PM and there's all of the aspirin and all that kind of stuff, he was doing route sales for him. And then he started, there used to be, you could go in and buy sunglasses at the AM/PMs and all that. And he put this program together and started buying stuff from China to compete with this other guy that was in Northern California. And then that guy called him and said, "Come to work for me because you're the only one that's competed with me." And then that's what caused us to move down there.
Oh, that's cool. So how does it impact you? I mean, it's a big family, a lot of kids. How did that impact you guys moving a lot in changing environments?
I think that I think there's pros and cons to it. As a kid, you just adapt though.
Yeah.
And I remember as I got into real estate and started, working with people, and they were like, "Oh, we want our kids to go to the same school the whole time and all that." I was like, "Man, I didn't go to a school for longer than 2 years my whole
Yeah.
life." So it was a constant movement of learning to adapt and learning to be around people, and which is a good thing, but stability was just not something that I was super familiar with.
Yeah. So, but you didn't feel stressed out or anything. You just, it was
No,
just fun. It was just like, all right, we're moving again. It's
it
what we
was we're
do.
moving again, and our house was full of love, so
Nice.
we had a whole, there was a big family, so there was always someone to, and my parents were religious, so every time we would go to a new town, there was always the congregation there that would pick you up and just take you right in, and so there wasn't like this feeling of being on an island or any of that
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah, that's super important. Having community and having the ability to build community quickly, that's super valuable. So
Yes.
so what are some of the things that your parents did well when you were growing up?
Lots of love. I my parents grew up, I was Jehovah's Witness for, a lot of the time, and so there wasn't birthdays and Christmases and all of that kind of stuff, but we never felt like we were left out. We would have family party and get gifts, and then my parents would buy us stuff. And, we were poor. Um, we were poor and broke. I think poor is a state of mind, broke is a state of account. And that was one of the reasons we moved, because we were always just barely scraping by. Um, but I didn't even realize that until I was in my 40s that I ever look back and go like, holy crap, we were dirt poor, man. So that they did really well was just shielding us from all of that. And, what you don't know isn't normal is normal to you, right?
Wow. That's pretty powerful. I mean, to be able to not transfer that stress of the economic stress to your kids, because typically, I mean, us, we're like, fathers, dads, we take on that responsibility. We take on you feel it, I mean, your kids feel it, absorb it. So what did your dad do, or did your mom do to
And
actually
and
shield
they
you guys?
They did. I mean, there were seasons where we didn't have a heater. We had a kerosene heater in the middle of a middle class neighborhood, and we had a kerosene heater in the front room to keep us warm because they couldn't afford to do it. And they would say, "Well, we can't afford to do that." Um, but it just didn't mean anything to us because we didn't know there was any different. I didn't know that other kids had heaters that worked in all of the rooms, right?
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
was just I think that's one of the things that I translated forward to my boys is just whatever you find is good and bad, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's when we grow up, we do one of two things. We either go down the same train tracks that our parents did, or we rebel against them. It's usually
Yeah.
one of those two. And, for me, it was just what was normal, what was normal. And so I didn't put as much, I didn't worry as much about my boys and how they thought and how they were doing and all that kind of stuff. Cause I was like, whatever's normal to us is
Yeah.
what they're going to find normal.
Yeah, that's true. So what did you think your parents should have done better?
Hindsight's an exacting science. I think that when you have four kids, you're not able to give them all the time that you need. And I saw as each child, by the time my youngest brother was born at 17, I basically raised him because they're like, he's growing up no matter what we do at this point. And, I yeah, that's a really difficult question for me to answer because I wouldn't be the person that I am today if they didn't raise me the way that they did, and I'm pretty happy with how everything's going now. So the good and the bad um kind of made me who I am.
No, I totally understand. I agree 100%. And but I always think, what if there's this element that's, was inserted, what would have happened? So if we've gotten this attention or this focus or this,
You know, the,
direction or this guidance toward this or that, what would
the
have been for you?
the only place that my parents fell extremely short was they just had no relationship with money, and we never talked about money. We were always broke. My dad made good money a lot of times, but with six kids there's always a place for it to go. He's was never comfortable with money, still is not comfortable with money, is still broke today. And that would be the only thing that I wish I would have known better. And if I would have known better, then a lot of the things again that make me going through some of those struggles and the self-growth that came from, because most of my self-growth came from someone asking me a question about money.
Yeah.
And it was really the first time that I had this epiphany of I'm reliving my parents' normal, and that was on me, and that I had zero awareness about it. I'd been living 35 years just riding the train tracks that they had laid down. And so if they had taught me about money, I don't know that I would be who I am today, but that would be the only thing that I
Yeah.
can think of.
Yeah, and do you think his lack of knowledge around, financial literacy, if you will, did it come from his dad? Because his dad seemed
Oh,
to be a business owner, and he had.
Yeah,
It seems,
my grandfather owned businesses, and my
yeah,
grandmother was the one who was the financially smart one. You know,
God,
in hindsight, going back, and we would work on my grandpa's ranch, and the boys were outside, the girls were inside. So we got grandpa, who was the salesman, the people person, the joker, the laugher, all that kind of stuff. That was my biggest influence, other than my parents, was my grandfather. He taught me a work ethic, he taught me all these amazing things, and he would have owned none of it if my grandmother hadn't been in the background making sure that everything was going financially right. And I had no idea about that until, again, probably the last 5 or 10 years have I really sat back and gone, holy crap, it was grandma that had all the money. And my dad was raised by my grandfather, because, again, boys were outside working in the field, and the women were in the kitchen and doing that stuff. So
yeah.
very old school, but that's where my dad's came from, and he rolled it right straight through to me.
That's fascinating. And do you think that part, is it coming from like a DNA of like risk taking, or is it just not
No,
like
none of us were
there
any
was no
adverse
risk
to
taking
risk.
at all?
No, we had no problem with risk at all, because
Got it.
money didn't mean anything to us. So
Got it.
it was, making the moves, doing all this kind of stuff. We're very willing to change and very willing to take risk. There was just no, there was there was no purpose or goal or even awareness as to the fact that we couldn't rub two nickels together no matter how much we made.
So what was the focus? When you think, what's the strain, the focus that's connected from the grandpa to the dad to you? What is the kind of the line that's,
Oh, the
what's
line
the
is,
most important thing? What's the North Star?
it's that we all were given the gift of being able to talk and communicate with people in a way that, and to read people and to be able to guide them down a journey without it being forced.
Okay.
um that to me, we call it the force. Of the six kids, um one of them used the force to the dark side, and he used that gift to manipulate people and live until he was in his mid 40s, never having a real job. He was good looking, and he just went from woman to woman to woman, and dating, and quick job to quick job, and painting curbs and all this stuff, because he used it for his own benefit. And the rest of us, and me, and more than anybody else, really went into sales and understood that, but all of us have it naturally.
Got it. So it's what you were mentioning, like your one of your brothers.
Yes, one of my brothers.
Okay, got it, got it. Okay, yeah. So it's that love and connection drive is what kind of drive that's common among the three generations, if you will. That's awesome, and you
Yes.
see that in your kids.
One yes, one no. It's
Okay,
it's very interesting, that when you have, and I think for a lot of the guys that are listening to this, that have younger kids or kids that are teenagers, this was one of the biggest shocks of being a parent to me, is that I had one boy who was super comfortable talking to people. Both of them were Eagle Scouts. One of them was like going and standing up in front of the Mormon church, talking about him needing people and describing everything, and super comfortable dancing at weddings and all that. And my other son was like, I don't want any part of that. I don't want to be around people. I don't like people, all of that. And I would have bet my house, and my wife and I've had this conversation many times, that Landon, who is my older, would be the salesperson, and Ewan would be an engineer. And they hit 17 and 18, and literally both of them did a 180-degree. My
oh
son
wow,
Landon is doesn't like people, super comfortable hanging out with just his girlfriend, doesn't like talking to people, isn't really great at it anymore. And my son Ewan is an entrepreneur and is out knocking on doors, doing his own company. He's working for a garage door place right now. And after the first week, he came home and he goes, Dad, the guy that's working with me is 40 years old, living paycheck to paycheck. That will never be me. And
wow,
so we have these preconceived ideas of who we want our children to be, or who we think they're going to be, because how they act at 10, 11, 12 years old. And the reality is that it's so much better for us to release that, because we're wrong.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
wrong.
No, I think there's definitely an element of observing behavior and tendencies um, and kind of following it. But then also, like you said, it could flip. They're still developing. Their brain is still developing.
Well,
So,
and we impose our will upon them of who we want them to be.
yeah.
And I think there's a really fine line that as a parent, my oldest son Landon, for example, when we didn't even know this when he was a sophomore in high school. I said, "Hey Landon, we were just chatting and he was doing okay, pretty good in math." I said, "You should be an engineer." And he was like, "Well, why?" And I said, "Because you're good at talking to people," which he was at the time, "and you understand math and you could be like a go-between between engineers and the normal people. I think there's
Yeah.
going to be there's a huge need for that." And he was like, and now that was the conversation. He gets out of high school, he goes does an engineering at the JC for 2.5 years, and then he's like, he was struggling and wanting to quit or something, and we had a conversation, and I said, Landon, do you like engineering? And he's like, no. I said, do you like people? And he said, no. And I go, well, then why did you do this degree? He goes, well, when we were a sophomore, you said this was something that I'd be good at. So that conversation, that one conversation that I had with him, shaped him for years and pushed him in a direction that was not in his natural gifts. And that's where that, like, we having a preconceived notion of our children can be, it cannot serve them at the highest level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. But I also take the other side of that too, where you can let the kid do his thing and you think that you're not pushing or influencing or directing, but then their next door friend or the high school friend or the girlfriend does. Someone is going to tell them what they're good at. And I would rather be the parent who's aware than the kid next door who's not.
I I don't disagree, and they see what you do more than
Right.
you say.
Right.
So if they see you working hard, and that's the thing with both Landon and Ewan now,
Yeah.
and there is a story I want to tell about kicking
Yeah,
them out of the
please.
house as we get farther down this, but they both have a really great work ethic. They're both really smart. They're both really good with people. They both are going to be successful now. And it's because they saw what we were doing, not what we were saying. Because real talk, I was a horrible dad for teenage kids. I was an
Mm.
authoritarian. I didn't talk about emotions. I was like, this is how it is. If I say jump, you say how high. I say put your phone away. You don't put it away immediately. I take it out of your hand. So I wasn't there for them the way in hindsight I should have been, or that I was once I learned some of the skills that I didn't have. Now, as a father of young boys, I was an amazing dad. I was really, really there for them during that time period. And then as soon as they became teenagers, I switched into my dad, who was the
Mm.
authoritarian, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that um, when we tell them what they should do, we're way better off showing them what they should do and then being an influence for them, but not imposing our will upon them.
100%. I 100% agree. So tell me, so when did that shift happen? And I want to hear that story.
Well,
At
there's
what
two
age?
two stories. You mean what shift when
Like
they
the
to be the
teenage. Yeah.
authoritarian?
Yeah.
It was as soon as they hit puberty. They turn sullen, especially for boys. There's this really difficult age of like 12 and a half or so where they want to be
Okay.
kids, but they want to be adults and they don't know what they're doing. And they're just kind of pushing through that really awkward stage. And I stopped having fun with them.
Mm.
I mean, we would still do stuff and we would play and do stuff, but I stopped having fun with them and it became more about shaping them into men than it was enjoying the journey with them. And my
Yeah.
wife flip-flops it. She says the teenage years were the best years with our boys because she started having fun with them. And so the awareness came from when I started getting communication coaching and really understood how I was communicating with the boys wasn't an example that I wanted them to pass on to their kids, of that authoritarian, of all that kind of stuff. And it was a difficult challenge and humbling for me to start saying, "Hey, when you do this, this really makes me feel like you don't appreciate me and it hurts my feelings." That was really, really difficult for me. And truthfully, my boys had no idea how to respond to that. Like we had one argument with Landon, my older one, where they were on their phones and we were working in the garage and I'd asked them to put their phones away like 3 times and they didn't do it. And my normal response is just to walk over, take their phones and say, "You lost it for a week, it's gone." And I said, and I went with the emotional side of things and I was like, "Landon, that really hurts my feelings when you do that." And he lost his mind. He started arguing with me, like making no sense at all. And my younger son, Ewan, who was probably 16, Landon was 18 or 17 and 15, something like this, was just standing like, "What is going on right now?" And it was this whole new dynamic that they didn't know how to deal with because I was giving them something that was not the train tracks that they'd been given for forever. And
Yeah.
the lesson that I learned from that is, it's never too late to become more self-aware and adjust how you're showing up for your kids.
Yes.
But that was a that was a really good season for me. I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to make that adjustment and have those conversations. And now our conversations are much more relaxed. And, they're, of course, getting older, but I feel like the friendship is coming back much faster than it does for a lot of kids with their dad.
That's super powerful. And I think that realization that you made right there, where it's never too late to be aware and then change course
Mm-hmm.
and then make change. I mean, it's never, I hear from people that have like kids that are 10-year-old and telling me that it's too late. And I'm like, dude, you're like, you got
Never.
plenty of time.
If
You
if
got
you
plenty of
make a
time.
change and they see you doing the work of making the change, you're giving them an example that says you're supposed to be working on yourself. And I think that for a lot of us parents, we try to show them that we know everything and that we've got everything together. And there comes an age where they're old enough to see that you don't have it all put together. And the
Yeah.
best thing that you can do is show them that you're struggling and that you're trying to figure it out yourself and that you're trying to learn yourself what it is. And this illustration pops into my head. I was talking to my nephew who's having some emotional issues and he didn't want to go see a therapist. And so we were talking about just therapy and his resistance to it and all that kind of stuff. And he's 19 years old. And this illustration came up that has just resonated with me as I was talking to him about it. Our children and our brains are engines. They're electrical impulses that fire, right? We as parents are the mechanics that are tuning our children's brains to try and be as good as they can be. We're all doing the best we can with what we have. The problem is that for a lot of us, we've never had our own brain looked at by a mechanic. And so we're tuning our brain and we're like, "Okay, I'm reading self-help books and all this kind of stuff." And then, but if you take a car, and it doesn't matter what the car is, it can be a Ferrari or a 57 Corvette or whatever it is, and you take it to a master mechanic and they open the hood, they're immediately going to find things that you can do to make that engine run better. So when we're fine tuning our kids, if we're constantly having our own engine worked on and have a master mechanic who can help us make the changes and change the oil fuel mixture or change the timing, and our kids see that we're doing that work, it's going to be way easier for them to accept our help because they understand that we're just trying to help their engines run better. And then B, they're much more likely to be open to all of those things because that's what they see as normal, instead of all of these parents of all these kids that I see where the parents put on this front all of the time of having all of their shit together. and they don't, and their kids have the same front all of the time because that's what they find normal.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And it's also fine tuning for what? Your people are tuning the engine. Are you tuning for speed, or are you tuning for
Exactly.
dependability, or are you tuning for
And
what's the
and
goal?
and so it's like, do what do you want your kid to show up as? And for me, I
Yes.
want a kid that's going to run forever, that's got a big motor that can tow a bunch of stuff to it, and then also has some top end speed. So I'm trying to get
Yes.
the all of the above out of them, and
Yes.
and so yeah.
Yeah. Do you want dependability, or you want full speed, or you want straight line speed, or you want turn speed, or what do you want? What's the goal? And I think that's the biggest challenge also, is that a lot of times people go into this um, trying to influence without an actual end goal. They influence because, oh, it doesn't look right, it needs to look this way. But okay, well, for what? What's the point? What's the goal? And then whatever the goal was for you, you grew up in a different world than what it is today. They're the way they have to optimize. They have to optimize for a new world, and not necessarily even for the world of today, for like the world the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And that's a conversation that I have with the boys. I heard crap, what's the guy's name? The big guy, Ed Milet, was telling this
Hmm.
story one time about his version of heaven, and he said when you die, you go to heaven, and you get introduced to the person you have the potential to be. So for what I talk to the boys about, especially as they get older, is you know are what are you doing to become the person that you have the potential to be financially, as a husband, as a father, as a friend, and just having them put that awareness in their head of who is it that they want to be, what is it that they want to accomplish, and then how do you become tune that motor, how do you become that person, and what are the things that you can do to constantly be trying to improve to become a better version of yourself.
Yeah. And do you go in like another step into how to do that?
Well, they see it from me.
Got it.
I'm surround myself with people who are farther along the journey. I have a therapist, I have a communication coach, I have a fitness coach. Jen and I do read books together for relationship, and the boys see that. We do marriage conferences, we write goals, and that's one of my areas of mastery. And Jen writes really amazing goals now. So we write goals together. The boys see me every morning with my habit tracker and doing my goals. So we're setting the example of what does that look like, and it isn't just putting your head down and doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And my wife and I were talking about this just this weekend around, we have a couple friends who have, were older and have adult kids now. And
And
they're
how old
kind
are
of
your
like,
kids, Jay?
mine are, well, they're turning 10 and 12 this year.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but we have friends who are much older than us, and I always had older friends, so much older than us who have adult kids, like in their 30s now. And we noticed these two sets of friends that have two sets of kids that they're all kind of had lived the same lifestyle, the same middle class, upper middle class lifestyle. But then one set of kids turn out to be really successful, had their own families, they're doing great, and then the other set is still living with their parents with mental stuff and kind of not financial challenges. So we started thinking about like what's the difference, what's the gap, where these kids grew up driven and these guys didn't. And so where they both went really good education, went to good schools, spent a lot of money on education, spent a lot of money on stuff. So what happened? And at the end, I kind of thought about two things. There's the capability and there's the drive. So when you're raising your kids, you want to help them develop capability and help them develop the drive to, take advantage of that capability. But then that capability has to align with their gifts, with God-given gifts, whatever the tendencies that they have natural to them. Like you said, whether it's a 10 or maybe the tendencies that show up at 16, 18, whatever those tendencies, you align those tendencies to what's going to give them the most potential and help them develop capability in that thing. And
And
one
I
of the challenges that I have is that a lot of parents today, they give their kids a menu of like 50 different things. Go try this, try this, try this, try this, try this, and hope that something's going to stick against the wall when the kids never sit enough in the thing to develop mastery of anything.
Okay,
So
and I agree and I disagree a little bit.
sure,
So
go ahead. Yeah.
what what you're talking about with capability and drive, where do those things come from? Where does
They're
drive come from?
from the inside. So
Yes,
drive comes,
but
so
what
drive,
causes drive?
I'll tell you, when your natural talent align with what the world needs.
Nope. Nope. Where does drive come from? Drive comes from struggle. Drive comes from you wanting to prove to yourself or to others that you are capable. That's really where drive comes from. The biggest mistake that I see parents, and now I watch it from a totally different lens, especially those of us that come from nothing that have built wealth, is that we are the safety net for our children,
Yeah.
especially for boys. There's this huge failure to launch epidemic that is happening right now with young men. And the reason for that, and this leads it into my story, the
Yeah.
reason for that is because they're good kids who are smart, that get good grades, and we're always there to catch them when they do something wrong or when they go off or when they don't achieve something. You're like, it's okay, it's okay. And the reality is that what made us successful is struggle. And for young men, that is what young men need in order to have drive, to have the ability to take all of those other factors and use them to achieve or to become great members of society. So I kicked both of my boys out of my house last year. One of them lived in his truck for over 2 months, literally lived in his truck for over two
Wow.
months. The other moved in with his girlfriend and lived with them for about 6 months, where it was two, four, six people in a 3 bedroom, 1 bath apartment. And it was super hard for us to do. Gary Vaynerchuk has this he did this video, he was talking about it, and he goes, when you don't allow your children to fail, what happens is they wake up at some point and they say, my parents don't believe I can be successful. And as soon as they have that realization, they will not launch, because you are always going to be there to help them with whatever challenges or struggles they have. And when he said that, when I heard that, it planted this seed inside of me to where both of my boys both went to college, both decided college wasn't for them, both of them were not launching. Neither one of them were, they were sleeping in, making excuses, supposed to be getting a job, all this kind of stuff. And my wife Jennifer, who is, if you guys know her, you know how special my wife Jennifer is. But we weren't on the same page, but we had conversations about everything, and we came to the agreement that we couldn't allow our boys to not fail. And so we gave both of them, one of them was living in an apartment because he was going to college. He stopped going to college, and I said, my rules have always been, if you go to college or work full time, I will support you and help you. You know, if you're going to do a school, or if you're going to go to get a trade, I will pay for all of that. As soon as you're not doing those things, I'm cutting you off. So I literally had him kicked out of the apartment. I said, you have 30 days to go find a place to live. He dicked around. And at 30 days, I said, your stuff's got to be out in 2 days, because this apartment isn't yours anymore. And he moved in with his girlfriend. My other son, this is about 4 months later, decided to stop going to school. And he'd always said he wasn't really a school guy. He's the entrepreneur. Um, I told him, you have to get a job. And so I gave him a time period to do it. He found a part-time job, and I was like, okay, that's a start. You need a second part-time job, or you got to get out. And I said, you have until Friday to be able to get this job. And it was like 3 weeks later or a month or something. And he's a smart, good-looking, hardworking kid. It wasn't a problem of him finding a job. And Jen was out of town. Jen was at a Go Wives trip. Timing is always awesome. So she left on when Thursday. So she had just left. Friday, Ewan came back from a trip. No, she left on Saturday and Monday. I told Ewan, I said, okay, here are the 5 places you're going. You're playing by my rules now. You didn't get your job. And I came home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and he was still in his sweats and he hadn't done any of them. And I said, grab a bag, get the fuck out. And he was like, what? I said, I told you, grab a bag, get the fuck out. You can stay with one of your friends. You no longer, this is always going to be your home. This is no longer your house. And he got super pissed and left and went and got in his truck. And the whole time Jen was gone, she's freaking out because she's got his location and he's sleeping 20 minutes away in a park in his truck. And he's getting, the cops are knocking on his window. So he's moving during the night to do it. And then he was just stubborn. So he was like, fuck you, Dad. I'm going to sleep in my truck just to prove you're wrong. And I was like, I'm so proud of you for doing that, dude. But he lived in that truck for almost 8 weeks. And then he decided that, and we would let him come home and shower, but that was it. Or he could come home and have dinner, but he wasn't allowed in the house. And then he just decided, okay, it's time to get a full-time job. And literally in like 2 days, he took that part-time job and made it full-time. And now he's working like 70 hours a week with a full-time job and then a part-time job. And if we hadn't have done that, if we hadn't have made those young men struggle with, and I get emotional just thinking about, they would still be at my house sleeping and playing video games and nothing would have changed. And so I think that that's something that more people need to talk about. More people need to be willing to have their children struggle at 10 and 8 and 12. Let them fail. Don't be their safety net, because those failures are what are going to give them the drive that is going to help them turn into the humans that they have the potential to be.
Wow, 100%. I couldn't said it more better.
Well, until you do it, you won't be able to say it better, dude. Because it
Yeah,
was freaking,
yeah.
it was
It's hard.
it was easy. It was so hard and it was so easy because once we stepped out of that mode of being the safety net for our kids and we actually looked at it, and Jen and I both had the conversation and of, we are not doing our children a service by being their safety net.
Yeah,
And I see it so many times in GoBundance, guys, because we don't want our kids to struggle the way that we struggled.
correct.
And at the same time, that's what made us successful. And so we have to let our children struggle. Did you go to the winter event?
No.
Okay. At the winter event, there was this guy that was talking about wealth. And he said this that I think is so freaking powerful. He said, we need to prepare our children to survive in the world without our wealth, so that when they get our wealth, they don't need it and they can take care of it the way that we took care of it.
Yes.
And so everybody's always talking about, well, I'm trying to teach my kids about money and all this kind of, no, you need to teach them to survive without you paying for their apartment once they get out of school, once, doing all of these things that support them, so that they understand that they need to learn how to survive on their own.
Yeah.
And then when you give them the money, they'll know what to do with it.
Yes. 100%. I totally agree. You need to give them the wisdom to fulfill their potential on their own, and the money is just a resource that can fuel, more of what they're doing, not the thing that actually
Yeah, and
creates their life.
from doing the 728 show so many times and hearing everybody's story, there's this universal thing that happens, is that every single one of those guys worked through the suck to achieve mastery. And mastery is what gave them the ability and the right to earn the money that they made.
Yeah.
And if we don't give our kids the ability to work through the suck to achieve that mastery of whatever it is, then they're going to just piss the money away and it'll be gone with 100% certainty.
So this is exactly what you just said. So what you said and what I said earlier, they're the same. So when we talked about capability and drive, they're essentially aligned. When you develop mastery, which is capability, let's say mastery, yeah, you need like a constraint. You need like you talked about a challenge or a hardship or the suck or your parent telling you you're not gonna freaking quit jujitsu ever. So you're gonna grind through it. But eventually there's a point where you cross the Seth Godin's dip, where you get through the suck, and then you know I have no choice but to get through. My parents are not gonna let me quit, so I gotta keep going. And then eventually you get to this peak where people notice you and say, "Hey, you're good at this." The world responds to you, says, "Hey, you're really good at this. You're really," and then it becomes part of your identity. And then, oh, I have momentum now. And therefore, now we're aligned our natural capability or natural tendency with mastery with what the world is responding to. And then boom, you have natural fuel. You don't, that person or that individual, you don't need to push them anymore. They have their own self generating energy to keep going. But you're absolutely correct. The parents either are going to create the environment like you did. You created the environment for them to stick to something, to figure it out, to master, living on their own and self-sufficiency. Or like for me, my parents divorced twice and I was living in couches. And as a kid, I figured that everybody around me didn't know anything about money and I needed to learn about money myself. And I developed that at 7, 8 year old. I had to figure it out on my own, or for you the same way. So there's either your parents are going to create the environment for you to have a challenge or accountability to do something, or the world will do it for you.
And for most of us, we need the world to do it.
Yes.
And so as parents, we have to let the world do it, whatever that is we have to let the world do it and not fix them. So
Yeah.
how long are we on this call? Because I have just a couple one or two more things that I want to make
Please,
sure
yeah.
that I
Go
do.
ahead. Yeah, yeah. Say,
Okay.
we have time, unless you need to go, but we
No,
have
no,
time.
no, no.
Go ahead.
I have time.
Yeah.
When I was so some of the things that we did really well, or
Yeah.
one of the things that I think we did really, really well with our children. And I had in my previous career, I worked in retail in the jewelry industry, and I had this woman come in and we got to be friends, and she had 4 kids and all of them were super successful. I mean, there was like a doctor and an engineer, and like all 4 of them were just really high achieving but also really balanced adults. And I asked her, and this was before Landon was even born, my first was even born. I said, "What's the one thing you did with your kids that you think made the biggest difference?" And she said, "Every single day since before they could talk, we would do our favorite part of the day before they went to bed." And so until our boys were 17 and 15, every single day we would go into the room and we would say, and everybody would do their favorite part of the day. So, and you had to say it a specific way. It was, "My favorite part of the day was," and then you would say what your favorite part of the day was, and then everybody would do it twice, and then it would be, "My second favorite part of the day was." And I think that that was one, and I feel like that was one of the biggest gifts with young children, was to see what their favorite part of the day was. I remember us going to Disneyland and me spending like 2 grand, because it's Disneyland, so you can't. And we just did all this amazing cool stuff, and it was the end of the day, and we were like, "My favorite part of the day was," and my wife, and then my son Ewan goes, "My favorite part of the day was French fries." And I was like, "You little son of a bitch. I could have got those at McDonald's for you and not spent anything at all." But it's like those moments where you get this peek into their brain, and we would do it no matter what. I mean, there were days,
Yeah.
and I grew up getting spanked, and we spanked our boys, and it was like those are the repercussions of, if you say you're going to do this and you don't do it, this is the repercussions. And so they would do something and I would spank them or something, and they'd be like, "My favorite part of the day was," and they would say their favorite part of the day. And I talk to the boys even now, and they don't ever remember getting spanked. because
That's
it
funny.
wasn't done out of emotion. It was done
Yeah.
out of, it was just, that was the repercussion of your actions. And so I was like, hey, dude, when was do you remember ever me spanking you or spanking you hard? And both of them are like, dude, I don't ever remember getting spanked. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's a balance. I know a lot of people aren't into spanking, and I think it's just consistency without emotion is important. But
Yeah.
my favorite part of the day was something that if you do have children, it's never too late to start. And it is a really, really amazing peek into what they're grateful for. And it puts them to bed every single night. A lot of people, I know people that do it at dinner. I like doing it at night because it's the last thing that went through their head as they were getting ready to go to bed was what their favorite part of the day was.
That's super powerful, and it's twofold. It's one is gratitude. You're training them on, scanning their day for gratitude moments, and then also you have this connection when they share with you these moments. So that's beautiful. It's funny that the Disneyland Disney World story is so common. Like you take the kids to Disney World and you spend thousands of dollars and say, "What's your favorite thing?" It's like, "Oh, the pool at the hotel," and I'm like. I'm like, what the hell?
Yes,
We
exactly.
spent all this money. We could have just stayed at the... So what's the other story? I want to hear
I'm trying. No, you know what? Like, all right, I got a funny story. This
it.
is more of just a funny story. So, when we, I before I got into real estate, or right when I got into real estate, we had bought our dream house. The market turned. We sold our dream house because I was now in real estate, and the market was just dumping. We sold it. I got a check for $1,800. So we rented for a year and a half, and then we ended up buying this little ranchette, 1950s ranchette, and one of the bathrooms was the classic like 2 foot by 2 foot shower. It was the
Hmm.
it was the dad's shower, and the mom had the big shower, the tub, all that stuff, and the dad's shower. And so we bought it, we remodeled it, but that shower was left basically the same. And my wife was going to some party or something, and Landon was probably 4, maybe 5. Ewan was 2 or 3. And so I was like, "Hey, Landon, come on, we got to shower." So I'm showering him, and we're talking about our day and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, "Okay, go get your brother." And Landon goes out and gets toweled off and runs and gets Ewan. Ewan comes walking in, and I'm showering him, and we're talking, and I'm washing his hair. And I said, "So how you doing, bud?" And he goes, "Pretty good, except for the penis on my shoulder." And I was like, "Okay."
What?
eh, Out you go. And that was the last time we showered together. But that's one of my favorite boy moments. He's like,
That's funny.
pretty good, except for the penis on my shoulder. I'm
Oh,
like,
shit.
nice. So,
That's funny.
and here's something that I would encourage all of you guys to do as well. My wife and I have in our phones just a notes section where every time our kids would say something funny or do something funny or all that kind of stuff, we would just take 30 seconds and write down what that was. So we have this whole page of ewanisms because my son at 5 and 6 years old was just so witty. And so I would encourage you guys to
Yeah.
start something like that because as they get older, 10, 15, 20 years old, you'll totally forget about it, and then you'll come back to it and you'll be like, oh, ewanisms, and you'll scroll through it and it will just bring back so many funny memories to you. I'm really glad that we did that because it those are some of my favorite memories that I would have forgotten with 100% certainty if we hadn't written them down and just put them in a little place in my phone.
That's awesome. And so so now that, they're a little bit older, how do you see your goals when they were a little bit younger with them? When they were younger, your goal was A, and now that they're older, you new things were revealed to you, and now your goal for your kids is B.
My goal for both of my boys, I think is the same goal that a lot of us have, is that well, I think there's a couple. One, and I had this conversation with you the other day. I'm like, dude, you're 20. Enjoy your 20s. There's no pressure. I didn't build a speck of wealth until I was 40 years old. Like I was broke until I was 40 years old. don't have all of this pressure that you've got to do and achieve all of these things. Just go be. And our example is there to where I know they're going to be successful.
Yeah.
They have it in their DNA now. And so I am much more now a perspective person for them than I am anything else. It's like, hey, bud, I saw you do this. Would you mind if I shared with you what I thought? And they're like, yeah. And my son Ewan is super receptive to it. My son Landon still thinks I'm the biggest moron on the face of the planet. And I know that that will change over time. So I'm like, honey, could you please say this to Landon, because he won't listen to me at all. But
That's good.
our roles just change from being the authoritarian or to being more of a uh, and I don't even want to use the word influencer, because we're once they hit 18, 19 years old, you want to give them the latitude to figure out their own life without you hovering over them. So
Yeah.
I'm just perspective for them now. And my hope is that I'm super proud of the fact that that I see who they have the potential to be, myself, and that they're both yeah, they're both going to be amazing people, and they are. And it's just really cool to see them figure things out on their own without my help, and know that they're going to be okay.
That's
I think
awesome.
that's all any parent wants, is just, you want to know that your kids are going to be okay. And I don't care if they're worth $1 million, but if I've got a son that wants to be a housewife, and his wife goes and makes a bunch of money, if he's happy with that, I'm totally cool with that too. It's just watching them figure out what their journey is going to look like at this point is turning into a lot of fun. There's still angst, but it's fun to see them do that.
That's cool. So what's your routine with them now that they're at that age?
Well, they're both back at home now because they're both working full-time jobs.
Okay.
And I'm a believer of, why make your life hard? I'd rather have them save money to position themselves, or to go experience stuff. So I always told
Okay.
them, if you're working full-time, you can stay in the house. My one son has a girlfriend that they've been dating for a year and a half, that at some point, I think, once he really gets his crap figured out, there's a good chance that they end up getting married. And then my other son is just, he's like, where should I put my money, Dad? So he's investing in my flips, and he bought some Bitcoin the other day, and he's just learning.
He's
I'm sorry, what
building.
was your question again?
No,
I
no, just
got
what's your
random.
routine now that they're a little bit older?
Oh,
But that's part of it. They're living with you, so you're
yeah,
seeing
they're
them
living
more.
with us,
You're
and
seeing
so
them
we
more.
allow them to have their own lives, but we see
Yeah.
them on a regular basis. And I every couple of weeks I'll be like, "Hey guys, you got to help me out here." And they bitch, but I'm like, "You're in my house and you're not paying rent
Yeah.
yet, so you've got some work to do." So we see them on a regular basis.
Okay. Are you having meals together, or they're
Oh,
like,
yes.
roommates?
Yes, and they come in and just hang out. Ewan is working a lot, so he's probably only home 2 nights a week, maybe 3 nights a week. And then
Yeah.
Landon's with his girlfriend a bunch too. So we're probably all together 1 or 2 nights a week, which is
Nice.
which is nice too.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm almost fascinated by kind of like what that life will look like, a few years from now. So I'm curious to learn what what other people do.
And it could just as easy have been both of them in college. I think COVID really affected my older son a
Hmm.
lot. So he
In
he
what
was the
way?
one. Say it again.
In what way?
Well, we're in California, and California, my son, from his junior year till he was finished with his sophomore year in college, was all online.
Hmm.
So he had no college experience. They barely had a graduation for him in high school. And we have friends well, of course, we have friends all over the country, but we have a bunch of friends in Texas that all have kids the same age as ours. And my wife was talking to one of them at Christmas time. We were over there for at a friend's place, and she was like, it's so interesting. She said, this woman from Texas, she said, all of my friends who have boys that are your boy's age, all of the boys are struggling.
Hmm.
And all the friends that we have in Texas, they're not struggling. And junior, senior, freshman, sophomore, college, those are all pretty pivotal years of just finding yourself and being around friends and having those experiences that just got taken away from, California and Oregon and Washington and some of these states that really locked down. Um, and so we've seen a difference in just who he's starting to come out of it now finally. But yeah, I think there'll be studies in the future
Yes.
that talks about these states and how they affected the young men especially, who just couldn't hang out with their friends the way that they normally would have. So that was a really challenging time to see him go through that.
That's so interesting. It's so true. 100%. Yeah, 100%. So any final thoughts, advice that you can
Nah,
share?
I would say for all you guys with really young kids, enjoy the shit out of them. Don't put too much pressure on yourselves or them. I still plug into the Raising Lions thing and listen to some of the guys, and some of you guys just need to lighten up and let your kids be kids
Yeah.
and take some of that pressure off. And then as they get older, they certainly see what you do more than you say, and just try to be an example of you trying to be the best version of yourself, and that's the best thing that you can possibly do. And then the last thing is let them freaking fail.
Yeah.
Do not be their safety net for everything. Let them fall flat on their face and cry and figure it out themselves without you coming in, scooping them up and telling them it's going to be okay.